Hello, friends. I'm Pastor Beth from Gray Memorial United Methodist Church in Tallahassee, Florida, and I'm coming to you today with a little Methodist moment. So today is June 28th, and June 28th is actually the birthday of John Wesley, the founder of Methodism. So happy birthday, John Wesley. This is my John Wesley bobblehead. It lives here in my office. You can stop by and visit him sometime. But who is this guy, and why did he start a denomination, and how did he start the Methodist movement, and why? So John Wesley was born on June 28, 1703, and his life spanned actually most of the 18th century because he lived until 1791. He was ordained in the Church of England in 1728, but he didn't immediately serve a church. He actually had a fellowship at Oxford, and it was while living there that he and his brother Charles and some of their friends formed a holy club. And they were so methodical in their approach to their spiritual life and in their approach to prayer and devotion that some of their friends and acquaintances sort of derisively called them the Methodists, that they were all about the method when it came to faith. It was really meant as an insult, but it stuck. So the Holy Club started to be called the Methodists. Well, the members of this Methodist Holy Club, what were the ways in which they were methodical? Well, they had regular communion services. They fasted twice a week. They went and prayed with prisoners. They taught adults how to read. They provided food and clothing, medicine and books. Eventually, they even started a school. In other words, they really lived out their lives of faith. Their lives really reflected their faith. Well, in 1735, the Holy Club disbanded because Charles and John decided to come to the colonies, actually to the colony of Georgia, where they could do some missionary work, more or less. They landed in Georgia on February 6, 1736. But in less than 2 years, John was back on a boat for England. His time as a missionary in Georgia was eventful, but not very fruitful. He was a very high church person. You know, he really held Sunday services to a very high standard, and he felt that they should be handled in a methodical way, right? That would be in keeping with other things I've told you about him. Some would even describe him as stiff-necked or stuck in his ways. He was stiff-necked, unlike this bobblehead. At one point, he refused to baptize a baby by sprinkling water on the baby, which is what the parents preferred. He insisted that the baby had to be immersed. We no longer hold to that as Methodists, but that was his opinion then as a priest in the Church of England. And then he also refused to allow a woman to receive communion because he felt that she had treated him unfairly, that she had scorned him, and so she was not in the right state of mind or state of grace to be able to receive communion. Again, we wouldn't do that today. This is something that John Wesley did back in the 18th century. He had a hard time making meaningful connections with the indigenous folks, with the enslaved folks, and with the colonists. He just didn't connect well with people. And in the end of his time in Georgia, he actually fled under cover of night. He actually was going to be arrested and put on trial, and he skipped bail literally in the middle of the night. He snuck away from Savannah so that he would not have to endure a trial. In that time, actually, the trial would have focused on whether or not he was doing things in keeping with the rules of the established church, or at that time that would have been the Church of England, the church that had ordained him as a priest. Well, he ended up going back to England, and a few months after returning to England, he was meeting with a group of Moravian Christians for Bible study. And as he heard them reading Martin Luther's preface to the book of Romans, he had an existential experience. He had an experience of the Holy Spirit where he really felt assured that God loved him and that his God wanted him to be saved. And so he described that as a time when his heart was strangely warmed. And so we often kind of joke about that in Methodist circles. We talk about it seriously too, of course, that we want to have these Holy Spirit moments when we know that it's not us, but that God working in us and through us to help us understand something in a new way. And that's what happened to John Wesley in his Aldersgate moment when his heart was strangely warmed. It was a profound moment for him, and it actually caused him to become more spirited in his preaching, and that led to fewer invitations to preach. Apparently he was too spirited in the pulpit for a lot of the folks who he knew. Well, his friend George Whitefield convinced him to go out to where the people were and to preach to them. That's something that Whitefield himself was doing. So Wesley submitted to be more vile and to go out into the fields, out into the areas around factories, out to the places where the people were already gathering. And he would bring them a sermon. He would stand, without the assistance that we would have today of like microphone or anything like that. He would just stand and he would preach. And large crowds would gather, and people began to really look out for his preaching and to really want to learn from him and hear from him. So he started to organize people within the Church of England, because that was the established church at the time. It was really the primary option that folks had. And so he started helping them organize into bands, which are very small groups. And then the bands were connected in societies. And then he realized he needed help with the administration of those societies, which were like churches. He needed other folks to be able to go into the societies and preach and teach. And he needed help organizing and doing the work of administration. And so he ended up equipping non-ordained folks, equipping the laity to preach and to teach and to handle the administration. And that really was the beginning of the Methodist Church. And some of those folks who he had recognized their gifts and he had given them responsibilities, they ended up immigrating to America and bringing Methodism with them. Eventually, Wesley felt he had no choice but to begin to ordain people, officially make them pastors, we would say. We don't use the term priests in the Methodist Church. And he even consecrated a couple of bishops, Francis Asbury and Thomas Coke, something an Anglican priest wasn't really authorized by the Church of England to do. But John Wesley felt that he had no choice because he had these churches that needed to be served by someone who was authorized, in that way. We were originally organized as the Methodist Episcopal Church in America in 1784, the MEC. Our first book of discipline was written in 1785. Our first general conference was held in 1792, and they decided at that point they would meet once every 4 years. And as they say, the rest is history. We still operate under a book of discipline. We still have a general conference that happens once every 4 years, except in the case of COVID, which actually caused us to have one that's been delayed. But that still is our primary decision-making body for denominational decisions. And then we're organized into annual conferences. We're part of the Florida Annual Conference, and so on and so on. But really my point is just to say that it all began because of what God guided one man, John Wesley, to do, and to live out his faith in that way. And so today we celebrate his birthday. So again, happy birthday, John Wesley. I'm going to pop my contact information up here. Send me an email or give me a call and tell me if you're celebrating John Wesley's birthday. Maybe this is just the excuse you were looking for to have a piece of cake today, right? I would just really be so blessed to hear from you. So feel free to contact me. And of course, would love to see you in worship with us on Sunday morning. We worship here in person at 11 o'clock. We're also on Facebook and YouTube. We live stream at the same time. This Sunday happens to be a communion Sunday, and again, would really love to share that sacrament with you and to be in worship with you. Grace and peace to you today and always.